Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme today we'll be discussing the danger of DIY abortions, and according to the Freedom of Information Act, 1 in 7 women that have abortions from home have serious health complications. So to discuss this ethical issue as well as abortion at large, I'm joined by Ben John from the Wilberforce Academy, Christian Concern, and together with Rebecca Moffat from the communications team at Christian Concern. I'll start off with you first, Ben. Give us a little bit of an update on some of the work that Christian Concern have been doing since you've last been on.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Simon, for having us back on again. It's great to be here. And yeah, Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre have been very busy with lots going on with various campaigns and initiatives that we've been engaging on. We'll get on to the DIY home abortions issue maybe in a moment, but some of the key things that we've been involved in most recently was we were speaking into and engaging and mobilising Christians to oppose in the House of Lords the bill relating to euthanasia and assisted suicide. We're thankful that that was dropped, which would have introduced euthanasia and assisted suicide. And an issue that we've been particularly speaking into has been responding to the government's consultation on the ban on conversion therapy. So we've been engaging with government on that. We hosted a symposium alongside the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counselling Choice, IFTCC, about conversion therapy and the issues there. And we've been mobilising Christians to really respond to the government consultation so that we can have a positive voice where we can proclaim the gospel of change and transformation when it comes to issues of identity. So those are two of the major campaigns that we've been working on in these last few months, as well as ongoing cases that we've been doing for individuals who are continuing to be marginalised for their faith.
Excellent. And Rebecca, what stories have you been working on? Because I know that you're in the comms team at Christian Concern. So what big stories have you been working on since you last been on?
Yeah, there have been quite a lot. There are always new cases every day, and the Christian Legal Centre takes hundreds of calls every year. But one of the main stories that has recently made it into the press is there was a nurse who got struck off for wearing a cross at work. That was quite a main story. We're continuing on with her case. That's ongoing. Another big one was released just last week. Brian Walker, he was an NHS electrician. He was forced out of his job purely for his Christian beliefs. He had some talks with people in the NHS Trust about Islam, about multiculturalism, about his various Christian beliefs, and for that he was pushed out of his job. So there have been lots of stories recently that we've been supporting, that we've been making known in the public, getting the public behind, and of course the big issue of DIY abortion as well, which is ongoing still after nearly 2 years now. In March it will be 2 years. And we've been working hard with other pro-life organisations in terms of the Care for Women Coalition, just to make the issues known and to petition the government really to stop the dangerous practice of DIY abortion.
Excellent, which is a great introduction, so thank you. And Ben, can you just elaborate more and give us more context on the government's decision during the pandemic to allow DIY abortions, or known as pills in the post, to take place, knowing that this could cause serious medical complications, in which it has, according to your press release that you've announced, that 1 in 7 women end up in hospital after with complications to do with these DIY home abortions.
Yeah. Just to clarify, I think it's 1 in 17.
1 in 17 women, yes.
Yeah, 1 in 17 women so if we rewind back to March 2020, so the government just went into announces lockdown, and then within days a press release goes up on the or an announcement goes up on the Department for Health and Social Care website announcing that DIY home abortions was going to be allowed. So just for clarity, abortion pills, there's 2 abortion pills that women take. The first one allegedly kills the fetus, the baby, and the second ejects the baby. And initially the second pill this was only a few years ago, was allowed to be taken at home. but historically both would have to be taken at the clinic. What this did was allowed both to be taken at home and to be posted at home, and there to be no consultation, no checks, no safeguards in place. What's important to realise is that this is something that the abortion lobby have been campaigning for a long, long time. So what happened was we go into lockdown, abortion clinics, a lot of abortion clinics remain open, but it's used as an opportunity to bring in this massive liberalisation of the law, which basically redefined homes as a place where an abortion can take place. So what women were allowed to do was they ring up a number. Normally you'd have to get 2 doctors to sign off on an abortion. They can just ring up a number, say they want to have an abortion, and the abortion pills would just be posted to them. So there's no checks on coercion, no checks on abuse, anything like that. So this announcement went up on the press release, and then it was immediately taken down, and Matt Hancock in Parliament said, we have no intention to change the policy. We have no intention to allow DIY home abortions. And then a few days later, there's a double U-turn. And Lord Bethell even said in the House of Lords, he said, we have no intention, he's speaking for the government, we have no intention to allow DIY home abortions because of the risks, the safeguarding risks, because it's not safe, because it's the wrong thing to do. That's what Lord Bethell said in the House of Lords, defending the government's position, speaking on behalf of the government. So we had a double U-turn. It was announced, then it was pulled, then there was all these things about we're not changing the policy, and then they turned back again. And we launched a judicial review challenging this, saying this is illegal, this is wrong. And in our case, it revealed, all these documents revealed from the government about the ways that the abortion lobby had access to the highest powers of government anyway, in the Department for Health and Social Care. So there were ministers in the Department for Health and Social Care who were pushing this, who wanted this to happen, and a lot of this is ideologically driven. And so since then, DIY home abortions has been brought in. Abortions went up massively. They estimate around in 2020 there were over 220,000 abortions, which is most on record. The year that takes us to close to we're about 9.8 million abortions since the passing of the Abortion Act in 1967. The Abortion Act came into effect in 1968. So between 9.7 and 9.8 million abortions. And we don't know what the figures will be for 2021.
That's extraordinary. And also, I know that when you sent the press release out, this was very much part of requiring a kind of Freedom of Information Act. How important was it to actually use the Freedom of Information Act to find this information that 1 in 17 women end up in hospital following complications from these DIY abortions? Now, clearly, this isn't something the abortion clinics were going to mention. It's something the NHS weren't going to mention. So it's good to kind of expose them. But why do you think it took the Freedom of Information Act and data on 85 NHS trusts to discover this information?
That's exactly it. The importance of these FOI requests, Freedom of Information requests, are so important because the government's not telling the truth about it. Abortion providers are not telling the truth about it. In fact, Helen Whately, she was then Health Secretary, back in July, she was asked whether they knew about complications resulting from DIY abortion. She said, centrally, we don't keep these records. And that's purely because the women who go to have these DIY abortions, who are sent pills, are sent forms, they're called HSA-4 forms, that essentially allow abortion providers to say, if you have any complications afterwards, go to A&E and they'll sort you out. So no record is made of any complications resulting from taking these pills at home. So the information is actually quite easy to find. It's just a case of knowing the right questions to ask, which is why we have all of these Freedom of Information requests. It's just a case of the government listening and being aware that actually you're not going to have the information there centrally because these abortion providers who are supposed to be giving you the information are not, because they're not collecting it. So what you've got instead are A&E, hospital trusts. These are the people that are collecting the information. They will ask upon arrival, why are you here? So the women will be able to say, well, actually, I've taken the pills at home. I'm experiencing bleeding or I'm experiencing pain or whatever they happen to be going through, and the hospital will then record that. And so that's how we've managed to find out. And actually there are so many more complications. I think it's estimated that about 1 in 5 complications is being recorded. So there's 4 that are missing. It's an awful lot of people that are going completely under the wire.
Ben, can you explain this to me? Why are the abortion clinics wanting to cover this up, covering any complications up? Why are they pushing for women to have abortions at home, knowing that, you know, you need the proper kind of medical advice and support, and none of that would be guaranteed just by taking these 2 awful pills at home?
Well, I think we need to remember that this is a spiritual battle that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the powers and rulers and the authorities. And so, I agree, it doesn't make sense. You know, organisations that say they care for women, organisations that say they're pro-women, which actually don't. And the reality is that the world loves darkness, and the world loves sin, and the world hates God. And so they want to cover these things up. And that's why what we're doing is, you know, Paul says in Ephesians that, you know, the light, we need to expose the works of darkness. The reality is the world hates death, and it's under the cloak, when it's blinded by Satan. The world hates death. I think, so at root it's a sin issue, and I think secondly as well there's a financial issue in this as well. There's huge money behind all of this. You see in the way that money in abortion's grown hugely over the last 2 generations, and it's a hugely profitable business and exercise. And I think this isn't the first time that questions and concerns have been raised about so-called quality of care towards women in these situations. The reality is that all of this is a form of idolatry, and I think it's tied in with a lot of other issues relating to, you know, radical feminism, radical sense of autonomy, belief in, you know, overpopulation, and all these kinds of different issues. That they say actually, we know what's best is for, you know, if you read some of the radical feminists of the last generation who would, you know, say that pregnancy and motherhood is bad for women, you know, a lot of that has filtered into a lot of what the abortion providers are doing. They want abortions, and, you know, the language has changed. You know, you hear, what was it, Bill Clinton back in the early 90s talking about safe, legal and rare, and now it's not rare at all. You know, there's no push to be rare. No one wants it rare amongst the abortion providers. They want as much abortion as possible.
And Rebecca, I mean, one thing surprised me myself. You can understand, I don't agree with this, and neither do you two agree with DIY abortions, but when the government said there's a pandemic on, there's a shortage in hospital spaces because our priority is to deal with COVID-19. So if you need abortion, take these 2 pills and you can do it at home. Sounds like, okay, it sounds like this could be a kind of sensible approach on the government. But you mentioned before the programme that this was a temporary thing and has been going really since March of 2020 through the then Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Does the government have plans to extend this once this mess that is COVID-19 is finally over?
That's a great question, and one that we would really like to know as well. So, as you say, it was introduced in March 2020. Initially, the government said, well, these are temporary measures, we'll only have them for the extent of lockdown. And then they were not taken down. In fact, they've continued throughout that time. So lockdown finished, we had a second lockdown. We've still got the DIY abortion measures in place, even though clinics are open. And Ben mentioned before, clinics were actually open, a lot of them were open during that first lockdown. So really, was there any need for this service? We'd argue no. What they're saying now is, okay, well, 2 years maximum is our limit for this DIY abortion. However, there's a massive push in Parliament from the abortion industry as well to continue it. And in fact, there have been multiple debates on trying to liberalise abortion more, decriminalise it completely up until birth. In fact, there was just a couple of weeks ago a debate in Parliament for the Health and Care Bill that attempted to decriminalise abortion completely. So actually we're seeing these pushes more and more frequently to continue not only the scheme but decriminalise abortion almost completely. Now thankfully that attempt failed, and the vote was it was withdrawn before it could even go to a vote. So no decriminalisation is coming into effect, thankfully, but it does look likely that this policy will continue into the near future. Yeah.
And Ben, the big question we have to ask is why aren't these abortion clinics? Why isn't the NHS actually warning women of the significant risks they take by having these abortion pills at home or DIY abortions?
I wouldn't necessarily want to project motivations onto the NHS and all these kinds of things. We know that they do lots of good work, but I think genuinely, I think that a lot of the institutions, including the NHS, have been captured by the ideology, and so it's not about I think they do truly believe that care for women means being pro-abortion, whatever the risks involved. And I think they've probably come to a conclusion, or however much they've stopped to think. I mean, to us, abortion seems so obviously wrong, but I think that just shows what happens when you let sin grow in your hearts. And I think, and you're transformed by the decaying of your mind. And I think that they're blindly following an ideology that they think they believe helps women, but actually doesn't. And they think that, you know, these risks or these costs or whatever it is, it's worth it because it's the right thing to do. They genuinely believe it's women's rights and her body and autonomy and all these things at whatever cost. And so I think that's why they're not saying anything. They're not speaking up because it's they support these. I think healthcare in general in this nation has there's a lot of questions to be asked about the way that maybe doctors are being trained, about the push for you know, there was a significant shift. For example, the I don't want to say this incorrectly. I think it was the General Medical Council. You know, voted to become neutral on the matter of euthanasia and assisted suicide, something that would have been unthinkable to doctors 50 years ago. And so we're seeing this tendency and this growth. You know, as more young doctors come up, young people are increasingly swept up and taught to be that if you're not pro-abortion, then you hate women.
I think you can understand why as well. I think there's a want to be pro-choice and genuinely pro-choice in society, and I think for a lot of people that means, well, pro-women and pro-this, pro-that. You can understand the want to care for women, but when it boils down to it, the only choice that's really offered to women is abortion. There is no choice to save the baby, to keep the life, and actually when you're aborting a life that is inside a woman, how much is that really caring for the woman? You're not thinking about what she's going to experience afterwards. And in fact, in this DIY abortion, there's very little aftercare. You speak to the women who have been through it, and actually they've not been seen by these clinics again. So the only choice here is not a good one that is being presented. So actually, yes, it might be popular to appear pro-choice and support that ideology, really, but it's really not a healthy one. It's not helpful. It's not helping the women that are involved. It's not a good choice at the end of the day.
So Rebecca, do you think that, as according to your press release there, that over 200,000 women have taken these DIY abortions at home since March 2020? And do you think that the abortion clinics and the NHS are underplaying the number of figures to do with the complications? Because surely with anything there comes a health risk, and this is a huge health risk.
Absolutely. With anything there does come a health risk, but I really do think that these numbers are being underplayed. And in fact, I think the government and probably abortion providers themselves aren't aware of how big the figures are. Like we were saying before, we've only found them through FOI requests. So nothing is recorded otherwise. The government have no idea. But actually, 1 in 17 women are experiencing complications from taking these pills at home. If that were any other healthcare provision that were being sent to homes as pills for women to take, or for anyone to take, whether it was for cancer or whether it was for any sort of health issue, if 1 in 17 ended up in A&E as a result, there'd be outrage. There'd be absolute outrage, because that would not be a provision that is working well.
And Ben, what's the reaction of the church to this one? I know that the great work that you both do and involved in with Christian Concern, bringing these really important social issues to the forefront of the Christian public in the UK. But also I think it's important to stress and emphasise the fact that as Christians we need to defend the sanctity of life, and that is absolutely vital, because otherwise, you know, the land cries out because of the shedding of innocent blood, and we know that that brings a curse from God upon the land. So effectively, we've had a curse on this land ever since 1968. What role can the church play, and does the church need to speak up more loudly on these vital issues that not only affect women in this country, not only affect children and the unborn, but also the sanctity of life and the spiritual climate of this nation?
No, absolutely. I think the church, this is a huge opportunity for the church to speak prophetically and pastorally. I think we've been a bit disappointed that the church in general, particularly amongst evangelicals, has been very silent on the issue of abortion for a long time. We haven't been discipling our churches and our congregations, so I think our congregations have adopted some of the beliefs of the world. They may not be raging pro-abortion campaigners, but there's a degree of syncretism of, okay, well, maybe abortion should be legal even if I'm pro-life but I'm pro-choice, which isn't a real position. It's effectively pro-abortion, and the church needs to be speaking into this issue. I think it has an opportunity to speak into the government, so we've engaged a little bit with the Church of England, whose position has been to call for the policy to end after the 2 years, after the end of the Coronavirus Act. Our position has been that we need to call on the government to end the policy immediately. And it should never have been brought in and should never have been passed. But it's good to an extent that the Church of England have said they don't want to see it made permanent going forward. I think the church has a huge role to play in speaking into this issue, and I think, yes, you know, the church is a minority here in the nation, but I think we underestimate the influence that we can have if we speak boldly. But pastorally as well, we need to remember that there are real, you know, these are issues affecting real women. We've met some of the testimonies. I'm sure Rebecca can share some of that in a moment. That many women feel they have nowhere to turn. You know, they get these pills and they may not even take them straight away until they're triggered one day and they think, I'm going to take these pills. And where is the support? And the church needs to be better. The church has been silenced. The church has an opportunity now to support, to walk with, and to love women who are in vulnerable situations, who are at risk of making an awful mistake, but a mistake that which there's grace and there is forgiveness. So, you know, there's an opportunity to say, you know, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. But the reality is that abortion is a sin. And so in our churches, when we keep silent, we either say one of two things. We either say abortion's okay and it's fine, so we don't need to say it, or we say it's the unforgivable sin.
For any women watching this programme that have had abortions during their lifetime, there, as Ben was saying, there is hope, there is redemption, there is grace, and there is forgiveness, isn't there?
Absolutely there is, yeah, absolutely, and that's absolutely a message that we need to be proclaiming in our churches loud and clear, because the reality is that a lot of women have gone through this, and actually probably a majority of women, even in your church, have experienced or have some experience of abortion, whether it's themselves, someone they know, a family member. They're going to have experienced it, and so actually this is a message that really needs to go out there.
Absolutely. And Ben, I want to just very quickly discuss what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic in the United States. The possibility, because of the conservative nature of the Supreme Court, they're talking in the States that Roe versus Wade, which was the ruling that made abortion illegal, could be under threat now, as we see that Texas, for example, is wanting to outlaw abortion as well, and America's becoming more conservative despite the most progressive liberal administration in America's history.
Yeah, I mean, so it is very possible. I mean, Trump was able to, was it 3 Supreme Court justices, which is a vast amount for one term. And I think there is a very real possibility that Roe v. Wade is overturned. I think we do need to keep perspective in the sense that the Texas heartbeat bill, I think, it's somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks in which the cutoff point. And the reality is most abortions do happen around then. So I think it is massively helping and it is saving lives, but in the sense it's not totally wiping out abortions. But it's a positive step to take. But I think we can't be too comfortable with laws which are making huge progress, but which definitely do not go far enough. I think if Roe v. Wade was overturned, abortion would actually go down to the state level. Yep. So abortion would remain in America. But it certainly means, if anything, when Roe v. Wade gets overturned, if it gets overturned, God willing, that's when the battle really starts. That's when Christians, evangelicals, pro-lifers need to be mobilised, need to be engaged, need to be organised at the state level to engage on these different issues, to overturn it. And this is where culture is so important. You know, Texas is very different to New York, or California, or Oregon. You know, radically progressive and liberal places. But that's where we can engage at the levels.
Yeah. Rebecca, within 30 seconds, how important is it that the Christians overcome the apathy and the indifference and really speak up for the unborn and really condemn these awful DIY home abortions?
In a word, massively, massively important. Please speak up. We need more Christians who are willing to speak truth, who are willing to fight these battles and actually support the women involved, because that's what it's all about. We want to give women another choice.
Excellent. So Rebecca, Ben, thank you so much for being my guest on Politics Day, and thank you for bringing this to my attention, because this is vital. And I want to thank you for watching this program today. There is forgiveness, there is grace in Jesus Christ, and he can forgive sins of abortion. But we also, as Christians, need to speak up for the unborn, because no one is defending them, and we need to defend them, because if we don't, not only is the danger of more complications, more hospitalizations due to these dangerous DIY abortions, but it's also a plague on our nation and brings a curse on our nation, and we want our nation to be spiritually free. So thank you for watching this week's Politics Today.